So I'm going to hand it over to the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll progress through a series of questions about HyFlex. We're going to approach it from the administrative angle, then move over to the faculty angle, and finally to a faculty supports angle. So Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan McCabe from Finger Lakes Community College. I am the Associate Vice President of Academic Technology and High Impact Practices.
Michelle?
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Michelle Currier. I am a faculty member in the Center for Criminal Justice, Intelligence, and Cybersecurity at SUNY Canton.
Okay. And Craig?
Hi, everybody. Craig Lamb, Genesee Community College, Dean of Distributed Learning. So along with online learning, I also work with our 6 regional campus centers, media services, tutoring and academic support, and a few other things.
Great. And Molly?
Hello, everybody. I'm Molly Mott. I'm the Associate Provost and Dean of Instructional Technologies at SUNY Canton.
Okay, great. So we have a nice assortment of experts here on our panel today, where we're going to explore the lessons learned, the challenges and opportunities that we've all encountered as HyFlex has been implemented across various campuses here. So our first question that we're going to address to the panel today focuses on the administrative angle of HyFlex and which courses are being offered in the HyFlex format for your particular institution, and why were those particular courses chosen?
I'll jump in. At FLCC, we started with networking and cybersecurity core courses. So we spent a good amount of money upgrading our networking and cybersecurity lab to ensure that students who were remote could really see and hear everything really well that was happening in that space. Since then, we have moved on to smart systems technology. And for the fall, we're going to be looking at culinary, hospitality, along with networking and cyber and smart systems technology. And the hope is that we will be able to get roughly 15% of our courses offered through HyFlex in the fall.
And what led you to choosing those particular courses, Ryan?
So mainly faculty interest and need. Networking and cybersecurity obviously is in a very specific lab, so it becomes tight on how many students you can fit in that lab, and with faculty load and so forth brought into that, it makes it a little easier if we can offer those sections outside of our service area and to students who may just not want to come in for whatever reason.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to address that particular question?
Jamie, I'll jump in. We started actually with our early adopters. They really drove what courses we offered, and Dr. Currier is one of them in criminal justice. So we had a range of courses across the campus, from business to healthcare management, which were very specific to the faculty that were interested in being a part of the pilot. One of the reasons why we encourage people to be a part of the pilot was it helped majors that were under enrolled. So it was a way of increasing enrollment. So we launched our pilot as essentially a retention and enrollment effort, and as a way for faculty to also just be creative and try something different and be innovative. So our early adopter, Michelle, is here and can speak to that too.
Great. Craig, would you like to speak about your particular campus?
Yeah, sure. At Genesee, a couple of years ago, we had large interest from our computer information systems and computer systems and network faculty, as well as paralegal studies. They were sort of the front runners at Genesee for a lot of reasons, a lot of it actually tracing back to just the changing dynamics and pressures on our students. And they found it to be very helpful where students could come and pick the modality when it fit their life. Since then, we've had accounting, criminal justice, and soon travel and tourism added to our area. And starting in the fall, we had a small cluster of students with some of our ESL courses, mostly because we had some international students able to get into the country and others not. And one faculty member in particular really pivoted on the fly to HyFlex to still keep all those students together as a cohort, even though geographically they were on different sides of the planet from one another.
Great. And your comment there, Craig, leads us to a question that Dean asked in the chat is, can you also define HyFlex on your own campus?
So at Genesee, we follow the SUNY definition very closely, and we look at it as 3 different legs running at the same time. One leg is students in a physical classroom with their peers, with the instructor, somewhat of a very traditional delivery mode. 2 would be a remote access to that live experience. We use Zoom, so students are able to come into the live class. It could be Tuesday and Thursday at 1:30, but they're joining, they're not physically there. The 3rd leg is a concurrently running asynchronous course offering. And the student at any given time can pick and choose which of those 3 legs they want to engage in. And we have some students that will be 100% asynchronous, others will be 100% in the classroom. Some will sort of pivot as their life changes, as the week changes. So we follow the SUNY definition very closely.
Yeah, and I would say, Jamie, that, you know, we're in step with Craig's definition as well. I think in our early adoption of it, that was our biggest struggle because SUNY hadn't come out with the definition. So we were following EDUCAUSE, and essentially what that is students can switch amongst the modalities based on their preference or needs, so that the students are the ones that are selecting the attendance option per class. And that was I think a little difficult for our faculty to let the students choose which modality, and that was a challenge we had to work through. Maybe you don't want to do that, so you're teaching hybrid versus flex. So I think that was our biggest challenge, but we landed on the same definition.
And Ryan responded in chat for anyone who wants to reference that. So we have our next question here. What are the lessons learned and challenges for developing in this modality? And if you could include a response to Lisa Duvak's question in the chat, and how many students are enrolled in these particular sessions. So what are the lessons learned and challenges in particular for how many students?
Ooh, lessons learned.
So our lessons learned, I think, are around that different disciplines may need different technology. You know, if you are teaching math courses where you are using a whiteboard primarily, that may require some different technology than if you're just in a general purpose classroom, or if you're in a networking lab, or if you are in a science lab. So I think that there are approaches, much like we do, I think, for online learning, asynchronous online learning, is sometimes we take a little bit of a different approach depending on what the discipline is. And I think we need to respect faculty in their discipline. And I think one way to do that is by ensuring that they're part of the process as we look in the creation of these rooms, because it's really, to me, it's not a one size fits all. You can't just make every room exactly the same and hope that it's going to work for every discipline.
I would say our biggest challenge that I heard from regarding faculty was their fear that students wouldn't show up to the flex session face-to-face, and that they would be teaching to an empty room. And some faculty were fine with that, teaching to no students or one student, and other faculty did not really embrace that. So we actually created a definition of a course that merges all of the different modalities, but there is an attendance requirement, and we call that a merged course now. And the reason why that faculty wanted to be able to control the attendance had to do with her discipline. So we've actually kind of then tweaked another type of modality or definition based on that need.
Great. Craig, how about you? About some lessons learned or challenges?
Yeah, a couple of areas that I could probably point to is the technology in the room. we found we went a little bit cheap on the very first go of it, especially with the audio. And if you're having a course where there's a lot of dialogue between students in the classroom and students remotely, having a good solid system in place so that students can actually communicate well with each other is critically important. So we learned that pretty quickly, to the point where between two terms, we were pulling microphones out of the ceiling and reinstalling new ones, much better quality, higher quality. I think too, creating sort of like a teaching team that does a lot to support the individual instructor, we find is critical. So not only is the instructional designer part of the very early conversations when somebody wants to move into this direction, but also the classroom technologist who's there helping the faculty member learn how to drive everything in the physical classroom in a way that fits their teaching strategy and their teaching style. And it's almost like this constant evolution of the team where, you know, they need to, the technology support has to flex and bend to the faculty members' preferences and strategies, because they are trying to manage so many different things at the same time. So getting all the tech people and all the supports involved very early on, I think, is critical.
Yeah, and I just want to echo what Craig said. Faculty need to know that they are fully supported in this, especially if they're early adopters, or if they're thinking of doing it. They have to know everybody is going to show up for them. So initially, we actually devoted a position, a learning space technician, to showing up, to be there, thinking that the faculty would need that technician the whole semester. And what we found out and learned was the technician was needed for maybe the first class or the second, but that the faculty became very comfortable with the technology over time. So actually the support needs were less than we thought, but you have to go all in and make sure that it's available, and then have the faculty give you feedback and say, I'm glad we have it, but I don't need it the whole semester. But that has to come from them. You got to start out being all on board.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Let's switch over to the question of what are the trends that you're seeing in your HyFlex course offerings?
Trends. More people are interested. I mean, COVID accelerated the interest and the opportunity. So I think more people are putting their toe in the water with less hesitancy, especially when they know we're there to support them. I think actually, Michelle, can you correct me if I'm wrong as an administrator? Is that what the faculty really think on our campus? Am I right?
I think you're right, Molly. I think that, you know, because of the pandemic, some folks did have to jump in with both feet who hadn't been doing it before. But I do think that particularly with the technology that we've selected for our HyFlex classes, that the faculty have become quite comfortable with it pretty rapidly. Yep.
Yay, the administrator got it right.
Yeah, and I would just throw out there that one trend that I think is going to emerge is that as we look to moving back maybe to some more normal operations when the fall comes around, we are most certainly going to have students who maybe aren't as comfortable coming to campus still. And this allows them the opportunity to still have that face-to-face interaction on the days that they choose, or, you know, take that class from their computer at home without being concerned about any COVID exposure on campus.
Yeah, I think we can't also forget what Flex has done for us in terms of enhancing our online classes and student engagement. Students that are in online courses now have the opportunity to interact with their peers who are face-to-face. And I think that engagement has been a real positive outcome of this.
Great.
One trend I'll note at GCC with maybe some of our more adult and non-traditional students, if you can even call a student non-traditional these days, is that HyFlex has seemed to really resonate with individuals who have very dynamic work schedules, family schedules. They have commitments to their local community. And we will hear from students saying, My preference is to join a live class, but if life pops up, I can still stay right on pace with the class, and I don't have to get notes from a student if I miss a week. I don't have to watch a class recording after it's already met and miss out on some of the engagement. You know, we have quite a few workers where their work schedule changes sometimes week to week, month to month, and they find that the flexibility here is fitting their life in a much easier way than trying to make a course a more traditional course or just a standard online coursework.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point because the trends in Flex mirror the trends in enrollment. We are going, our biggest demographic are the non-traditional students, and they are coming with all of these more needs for flexibility. So I think it's very coupled.
Any other emerging trends that people care to discuss? We have a couple questions in the chat that maybe I'll deviate from our planned questions just momentarily here. From James, how does HyFlex address the required instructional time for a higher ed degree? How is an attendance policy or rubric established?
Well, Flex doesn't have a attendance policy because the student chooses it. So that's got to be articulated in the syllabus clearly that the student is the one making that choice based on the class. Are you talking about seat time? Because it's the same as online. We manage it the same.
Okay. And I see Lisa had some questions, but it seems that some people are answering those for her within the chat. We have a question from Nicole. Are your courses mostly traditional lecture? Does anyone use breakouts or group work in these HyFlex courses?
Michelle, I think you would be great to share some of your strategies because she's a very innovative teacher.
So I was actually just planning to jump in and answer that. And I mean, my primary answer is that it really, it certainly depends on the type of instructor that you are when you start out doing Flex. I happen to be the kind of instructor that uses group work and student presentations and things like that. Although I do know that some of my colleagues are pretty straight lecturers. So, you know, I mean, I think that depending on the technology that you select, you have a lot of options. This past fall, I taught one of my classes where students did presentations live every week. Some of them were in class doing it in front of me. Some of them were live doing it synchronously. And then I had some who did their presentations and recorded them and uploaded them to a discussion forum that the other students had access to, so that everybody was doing the same activity in whichever modality worked best for them. But yes, I mean, we use Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, which has the function to create breakout rooms and use those as well. So yes, those are all definite possibilities, but it really is pretty dependent on the type of instruction that you typically do. That was actually one of the things when I first started teaching Flex that I struggled with, because we started out using Panopto, which is more of just a streaming option as opposed to an option that allows interaction among the students that are live on the stream with the students that are face-to-face and with me. The students who were watching the live stream on Panopto couldn't really interact. So I now have moved to Collaborate Ultra, where the Collaborate Ultra screen is up on the large screen in our Flex classroom. And then the face-to-face students who are in there can see everything. They can see my presentation, as do the students who are live, and everything is being recorded. And then all of the chat and the audio is available in the room. And as Craig mentioned earlier, we do in the Flex classroom that I typically use, we have really good ceiling mounted audio that we installed, not at first, because we started out using lapel mics, which was not the most awesome thing, but we have great audio. Yes, but we have great audio, and the students are really able to interact with each other, hear each other, see each other, those that attend live, online, and face-to-face. And then for the students that are completely asynchronous, that whole class session is recorded, so they have the ability to go and view it asynchronously on their own time.
Michelle, have you had any concerns about students teaching to an empty class? Is that something that, how do you work through that?
So when Molly mentioned earlier that there were some faculty that were worried about that, I wasn't one of those, because I still, even if they're not in front of me face to face, the large majority of my students are doing live interaction with me. So even if they're not in the room with me, I still feel like I'm there with them, even though they're in a session like this. So typically when I've taught Flex, I have usually around 8 to 10 out of a class of 30 who are diehard face-to-face, I must be face-to-face kind of students. So I always have students in the class. This was actually not the case during fall. So our first official, it's no longer, a weird thing, pandemic learning. This was our first official semester of real pandemic learning. And the class that I was teaching, Flex, was supposed to initially be a face-to-face, but it got moved Flex. And so all of those students signed up thinking that they were going to be doing a face-to-face class. And then every student, by the end of the semester, every student but one was completely online. So I did have just one diehard came to the actual class every single week. But that was fine. It was actually completely okay with me. It was a nice big space, but the technology in the room is great. I was very happy to be able to be there and utilize that technology in the classroom space. And the student who was by himself in the room was as participatory in the class and in the discussions as all of the students who were online. So, no, it never bothered me if the students were not going to show up, because they almost all show up in some way.
Great. So I see there are a number of questions here in the chat that I know are addressed in subsequent panel questions that we decided on earlier, but there's one here that from Diane that asks, how do you ensure equivalent educational opportunity across the options for accessibility purposes?
I don't know who wants to take it, but I think anytime you teach anything, you need to ensure that all your courses, regardless of the modality, should be universally designed and ADA compliant and very clear requirements for the technology. Just like, you want to be very transparent with students when they take an online course. They need access to a computer, but everything should be incorporated.
Can I pop in and answer that too? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Okay, for Craig. So at Canton, we actually have had a number of resolutions go through our governance process where any class now that's being taught as a flex class has to go through the full quality review process on our campus, which includes instructional design review and 2 peers who review, and a rubric that's used for a variety of quality indicators, including some very robust accessibility indicators. And so for a HyFlex class, the approach that I think is best practices is to design the course primarily for the asynchronous learner, because you need to make sure that you are meeting the needs of the students who are theoretically the hardest to reach, which would be those students who are asynchronous. And so we pay attention to and meet all of those quality standards, including the accessibility standards, in developing our assessments and ensuring that whichever modality the students choose, that they are meeting equivalent student learning objectives and course learning outcomes, and that all of the courses designed according to best accessibility standards.
Yeah, that's why if faculty are interested, if they could develop their course fully online first it really gets ahead of this and makes it a much easier process for them and ensures that quality.
Yeah, that seems to have been the consensus across, any number of people when they're discussing HyFlex. If you have the course created fully asynchronously already, you've already got a leg up. It's much more challenging when you're doing it from scratch. All right, so for the next question, we're going to move on. We're still in the administrative angle here. How are you addressing intellectual property issues on your campus?
Craig, Ryan, we'll all fight you for that one.
So at FLCC, intellectual property in this case, for our asynchronous online classes, we work out an agreement with faculty around intellectual property and joint usage and all of that. But for HyFlex, we haven't done that yet. So the intellectual property would be similar to the intellectual property used for a face-to-face class.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same at Genesee. We sort of treat the face-to-face and the synchronous piece like a standard face-to-face class, and the online piece, we would treat it the same there, sort of shared rights and, with a little bit more of the ownership to the faculty if they have, basically developed their product from scratch.
And then kind of on the same level of concern from the student perspective, what are the concerns about student expectations of privacy?
Craig's our person for this.
So we've been talking about student privacy quite a bit over the last couple of months and more recently, I'd say since our semester began. We as an organization follow FERPA. And there are standards in there that say if you're going to be recording a class, it can be repurposed outside of that class if one of two conditions apply. One would be there's no student audio or video captured in the recording, or two, you've received permission from the students on the recording to be able to use it in another venue, sort of like a model release form. So if there's any recording that's taking place with the HyFlex classes, it's 99% of the time, it is just for those students on the roster, unless the faculty member has either edited the recording and it's really just the instructor and their content, or they've gotten permission to reuse it in another way. But student privacy is a very important variable of this process.
Yeah, and Ryan, you shared out, Fact 2 came out with a sheet on the use of webcams in the classroom, correct?
Yeah. Basically what that said was that, requiring students to turn on their camera and so forth is not really a great idea for student privacy reasons. I know there's a lot of faculty who would obviously prefer that students turn their cameras on, but allowing a whole classroom of people into your home can be very intrusive. So Fact 2 did put out a statement on that. I'll put it in the chat so everyone can link over to it if they would like.
I provided some links about student privacy from a .gov site, as well as the specifically related to FERPA and virtual learning that either Ryan or Craig provided us earlier today, or last week rather. We have a couple of questions coming up in the chat that we might want to address from the user Scaletta. I believe that students who travel to the face-to-face class expend more time and effort than those who attend the class on Zoom from their homes. Do you give some extra credit to the former?
No.
We don't.
Okay. Short and succinct, I love it. And then we have any hesitation from faculty to be recorded within the classroom.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Craig, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
We haven't had any hesitancy because it is a volunteer process. So if faculty are not interested in being recorded, then, they just don't teach in this modality, I think is the way it's worked so far.
So Hi, everyone. Dean Dyer up at Jefferson. To follow up on that a little bit, Ryan, and I put up in the chat how you guys are handling all this video that's getting created this way. So if you could speak to that, that would be great, as well as the idea of, do you require faculty to record that live portion of it? Because if you've already got a fully standalone kind of asynchronous experience set up, is that actually needed for people who don't want to be there live?
Well, if you're going to meet the definition of flex, you're simmering all three modalities down into one classroom. And part of those three modalities, one is to have synchronous real time.
Yeah, and I agree with
Well,
that.
it's I get that, Molly, but
Go ahead, dude.
yeah, sorry, Ryan. I get the idea that you have to have the live for the people who want to be there face to face, or for the people who want to be live remote. But if you have that fully asynchronous experience, it's the idea that I could have my CIS 119 class, right? It's already set up as an online class, but it's now I'm going to offer at HyFlex. For the students who choose not to be there at that live time, do I have to record and provide that recording for them? Or, I mean, is it just something, that it's kind of nice?
My
Dean,
understanding is that yes, you do. Sorry, Craig, go ahead.
no,
Okay.
go ahead. On our campus, we're actually the opposite. The way that the online, I should say the asynchronous course is developed, a student can meet all the learning objectives and have, everything that they would need to meet those learning objectives with that asynchronous component. The class recording would be in addition to, or a supplement or a complement, but the student would not be dependent on watching the class to be able to engage in the course material and move forward in the course. We don't require recordings. I will say a lot of the faculty that teach in HyFlex, they tend to record. It's just their preference. And I think they see it as just one more resource for students if they want to tap into it. Just some of the technical side of it, we use Zoom. Those recordings are ingested into Ensemble, and then the faculty member makes it available in their Blackboard shell. So usually within a couple hours of a class finishing, the students will have access to the recording if that faculty member chooses to record the class.
Yeah, and I would also just throw out there that, of course, I don't know where I read this, but a few years ago, I read some data that indicated that students who have the chance to rewatch a lecture can do about 10% better on average than students who don't have that option. So I think that, it's really just about providing that to students. And also, I think it helps them engage with their instructor in a way that is different than just an asynchronous online discussion.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially some of the programs that have a heavy on applied learning part of it. The students want to re-watch those videos. And so I think recording it adds value to learning the content, and students do appreciate it. I'm curious from the faculty member, Vishal, would you consider not recording it when you're doing the synchronous live, or have you ever thought that way of not recording it?
Well, I have absolutely forgotten to hit record, so it's happened. But I do pretty consistently hit record. And actually now, maybe just in the last 2 semesters or so, Blackboard Collaborate Ultra now has a pop-up that says hit record ? So that's been super helpful for me, because that was, prior to that, I used to forget all the time. And I would tell the students, like when I would send out the announcement for the day, giving them the link to log into the session, I would say, somebody remind me to hit record. And they were very good about that. And it was kind of a joke, but I don't require the students that are doing either that are selecting the asynchronous modality on a day or a week. I don't require them to look at the videos in any way, because the course is already developed 100% for the asynchronous learner to meet the learning objectives about that. So like Craig suggested, I always do it if I can. If I remember it, they're always available, but the students aren't required to utilize them. However, I do think that there are some faculty on our campus who do require that the students access those recordings in order to complete a specific assignment or do some other task associated with the learning content that we.
Michelle, when you have students do your course comment, the evaluations at the end of your semester, do they comment on the value of recorded sessions, or what do you hear back from students about Flex?
So interestingly, in terms of student course comments, particularly the semester that I started doing HyFlex, I was so frightened that the students were going to crucify me because it was brand new. It wasn't just brand new for me, it was brand new for them as well. SUNY Canton has a very long history of doing online learning. I teach primarily upper level classes, so I had students who I had already had face-to-face before and who had already had quite a bit of experience with traditional online classes. So this was a brand new thing for everyone. And my course comments that first semester were they were out of this world positive because the students were very thrilled to be able to have this additional level of flexibility, part of which included being able to go back and review those recordings. And interestingly, at least in that first semester, when I looked at the stats in Blackboard, it appeared to me as though more students who were actually attending face-to-face were the ones going back and looking at the recordings because they were there, but they wanted to go back and kind of review something that they had already heard, that we had already talked about in class for the quiz or for whatever that reason. But every semester that I have done, I think I've done Flex every semester since I started. My course comments have been great. The students have really appreciated the access and the flexibility.
Interesting.
Great. So moving back through the chat, I see that most of the questions have been answered as we've gone along, or I've seen a couple that we're actually going to be addressing coming up. So I'm going to skip over the ones I know we're going to cover. There is a question, however, from Nicole asking, do you see differences in performance or grades based on whether students attend on campus, remotely, or online?
So the tricky part that we've had with trying to analyze that kind of data is that we don't typically track how the student engages in the course by course by course. And like I said, we'll have some students that will start off asynchronous and switch over to the classroom or switch over remote, vice versa. We just haven't tracked that. And as we've talked about that same question, we start to unpackage it and realize how tricky it would be. The instructor would really have to say, this person did this every single class meeting, and try to do some sort of analysis off of that. So it's been a good question that we've been asking here, but I unfortunately don't have a good answer for you.
And I wonder, what do the faculty see? Because they're going to recognize right away if they see that one modality, like they just taught face-to-face last year and they're teaching Flex now, and it's a big difference. I mean, Michelle, have you seen any changes in grades that you've noticed?
Changes in grades? No, I haven't done really serious analysis of the differences between students who select completely asynchronous versus live, or a combination of live and streaming live. But I will say that for the most part, the students in my classes, which are typically capped at 30, I might have 2 or 3 who do everything completely asynchronously. So I don't have a very big pool of students to draw from. Most of those students are choosing to do some form of the live interaction with me.
And I think, and I'll say this, and this is definitely administrator speak, but, we had these same questions when we launched online learning, and, the whole no significant difference phenomena. And I guess what I would say is, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the way it was. It is going to continue to be a mix of all these modalities that provide flexibility and access to the demographics. So I'm not sure that's the right question to ask. It's more about how are our students doing overall? Are we retaining our students at the institution? And what do we need to do better to support faculty teaching and students learning?
Great. So there are a handful of questions that are all kind of talking about the same thing from slightly different angles. And it seems to be, how are we ensuring equity among the assessment of learning across the different modalities? So how are we assessing learning in someone who's choosing to be completely asynchronous versus attending classes live and in person? How are you managing the assessment in that regard?
How is the faculty managing the assessment?
Yeah, so are we talking,
Ask it.
are we talking like informal, formal? Are we talking like a campus-wide assessment process to ensure the students?
I think it's assessing the learning outcomes of a course. Are they meeting those learning objectives, and are they learning the course materials? How are you testing to make sure, or what types of assessment are you using, and how are you making sure that it's equivalent depending on which modality the student's in?
So at FLCC, all the courses, regardless of their modality, use the same key assessment. So if it's HyFlex or it's online or it's face-to-face, it doesn't matter. The same key assessment is used, and obviously then it is, I think it's every few years, depending on the course, you go through and you take a look at it and you do some comparison, and then you make adjustments based on that, like you do for any good assessment process.
Great. Anyone have anything to add on that? If not, we're going to switch over to the faculty angle, which will address probably a good dozen questions here in the chat about what it takes for a faculty member to develop and deliver a HyFlex course. And we'll probably be leaning a little bit more heavily on Michelle, as she's our faculty expert here. The first question is, as far as HyFlex is concerned, what's expected of a faculty member?
In terms of developing a class, what is expected is essentially the same thing that is expected of a faculty member developing an online class, because as I mentioned earlier, our very first task is to develop that class as an asynchronous online class. And so from there, and working with instructional designers, we certainly do spend time considering the ways that we can make our assessments and our course learning outcomes equivalent, depending on whether or not a student chooses a variety of the modalities or sticks to the asynchronous modality. But primarily that course is going to be developed, and it's going to be approved as an asynchronous course first. And then you would work with the instructional designer I am very sorry about my dogs. You'd work with the instructional designer if you need to develop creative and or equivalent assessments if necessary, which is often not the case, for students who are doing any combination of the synchronous modalities. And then in terms of additional expectations, there are technologies associated with teaching HyFlex that are not typically the ones that faculty are using if they are primarily face-to-face instructors. So there is some amount of a learning curve associated with some of those technologies. Ryan mentioned Panopto. We have Panopto at Canton as well. Collaborate Ultra, which is very intuitive and very easy. And I think to somebody's question earlier about how you're managing the videos, Blackboard Collaborate Ultra doesn't require Ensemble or any external or cloud-based storage because your video is recorded and captured and it's retained right there in Blackboard in your course. So, most of our faculty who are teaching HyFlex are already highly trained in developing online courses. They're familiar with Blackboard Collaborate or Blackboard and also theoretically, some have used Collaborate Ultra before. Not all faculty use Collaborate as their synchronous platform. Some are using Zoom, some may be using, we have integration of Microsoft Teams now in our Blackboard instance as well. So some may be using that. I use that for my office hours. So yeah, there is an amount of technology learning curve associated with teaching HyFlex, but as Molly mentioned earlier, having those really important faculty supports like Ed, our learning spaces technician, who is great, is really, really important. And he has made, I personally think that I'm probably an easier faculty member to teach than some of the others because I've been doing a lot of technology integration and experimentation in my classes for a long time. And I pick things up quite easily in terms of those things. So, you know, there is a spectrum there of how much training and education that your support folks will need to be doing for faculty. So what is expected of faculty may be a little bit different depending on your, you know, what you're coming into it with. But I think that none of it is so significantly challenging that folks that were not incredibly technology comfortable in the first place weren't able to manage, especially with the good supports that our institution has provided, and really the great investments that they've made in technology, the time spent designing spaces, creating what we call the Bob, which is we have a number of the HyFlex carts that faculty, if you're not assigned to a room, you can still manage to do a HyFlex class in a regular classroom space with this technology cart that you can sign out and then bring to your class. So that's been very helpful to faculty. And also anecdotally, in our department recently, I haven't used the cart. I've been assigned to classrooms, but one of my peers, one of my colleagues just mentioned how easy and plug and play the HyFlex cart was for them to learn and to use. So
Yay.
all in all, yes, it was, I was surprised because I've been fearful of using the cart, but I was very heartened to hear that was potentially a very easy plug and play situation for faculty. So what is expected? I think you should potentially, if you're thinking of being a HyFlex faculty, you should kind of prioritize flexibility yourself, because you do need to be able to do some learning. You do need, of course, on our campus, you would need to have a plan at least a semester in advance to actually create your fully online asynchronous course before you teach it for an upcoming semester. We do it a semester in advance. It goes through the review process. So flexibility, some organization, some desire to, you know, be innovative. And to me, I think that more than anything else, as Ryan mentioned, and I think Molly mentioned, it is voluntary to do this. No one is required to teach in this modality. So one of the things I think that is most important for a faculty member who's interested in doing something like this is kind of to have a big picture kind of mentality, which is that it does require a little bit more on the faculty end, but the actual benefit to the students in terms of potential retention, access, flexibility, and the ability to really, and to me, one of the more important things, the ability to actually engage some of our students who can't be physically present with us is, I can't underscore enough how important that big picture is when you're thinking about doing a HyFlex class.
Great, thanks,
Yeah, and I
Michelle.
just want to say that some faculty want to be very creative and innovative, but they just don't want to teach Flex, and that's fine. So I think campuses really need to support and encourage faculty to teach in different ways. It just might not be the HyFlex model. They might just want to do a hybrid, but you know, HyFlex isn't for everybody and every course, but creativity can be. So.
Great. And if anybody else on the panel has something to say about the expectations of a HyFlex faculty member, or you want to add to that with the next question and what it takes to be an effective HyFlex instructor. I think, Michelle, you were talking about some of those things already, but if anybody would like to add in what some of those effective practices are, that would be great.
Know that it's really any different than what makes a good instructor in other modalities as well. I think you have to be, caring and compassionate and understand the technology behind what you're trying to teach, and just really be as flexible as you can with your students. I think that, this education is one of the last areas of the world that seems to tell everyone that you're going to do, if you want to be part of this, you're going to do it on our time in our way. And so I think that we really could use a breadth of flexibility into higher education in general. And I think this is one of the ways towards that.
And I think COVID helped with that.
Anyone
I
else?
would agree, by the way. I was just going to say, I would agree with Ryan. I think that, and I think as maybe Robin just put in the chat, good teaching is good teaching. I would say, when I first started teaching Flex and we were using just Panopto to stream, I felt kind of handicapped by the modality because I am a very interactive instructor. I don't just lecture, and I need the students to talk back to me, and I need to be able to hear them, and I need them to acknowledge, and I just need that relationship. And so I do think, as I mentioned before about my course comments, I really feel like the thing that is hitting the students in the right place is the relationship that Flex teaching allows, because it's, to me, that's the best part of teaching also. And I think that that's one of the things that translates pretty well to this modality. And so I think the students benefit from that sense of community and relationship with their faculty members, if we're doing it right, if we're doing it in a way that's very engaging.
So Michelle, you think that Flex has given social presence to the asynchronous component?
Absolutely, yes.
Great.
You really administrated that one, Molly.
Yes.
So this question has been repeated throughout the chat, and in a couple personal little pokes at me as well. How much work does it take to develop an effective HyFlex course? Like, how much work is it for faculty? And do faculty need to develop their classes ahead of time as they do for online? Let's talk about that development cycle in addition to the delivery.
So I think the first answer is yes. Yes, it's a lot of work in the sense that, you have to be very intentional and very thoughtful about the students' varying modalities, not just in the work leading up to teaching the class, which is considerable. I mean, it's difficult to answer that question in a way that quantifies the amount of work if you're an audience member who's never actually developed an online class before. And so I would say, so part of the answer is yes, you need to do it in advance. At SUNY Canton, I'm not sure how the process works at other institutions, but if you're teaching a class in fall, you would have to develop it and put it through the review process in the spring. So if you're teaching it in spring, it has to be developed and go through the review process in the fall. And so again, I would just reiterate, we develop a Flex class primarily as an asynchronous online class in the first place. And so for an asynchronous online class to be developed, our review process is coming right up here, April 1st. And so we're almost in March. I have one class I'm developing right now. It will take me, and I haven't started yet, but it will take me probably the month of March, maybe, to develop that class. I'm not working on it 8 hours a day, every single day, but devoting a significant amount of time to the development of that class each week in leading up to the review deadline. And so one of the things I think that is very time consuming about developing online classes, if you're doing it in the traditional asynchronous way would be excessive time spent capturing and recording lectures that you plan to just pop into your asynchronous class. But I don't do that for a class that's likely to be taught as HyFlex. So, and some faculty may still do that. So recording lectures is time consuming. If you're not doing it that way, that takes a little bit of time off of the development process. But you know, it does take a certain amount of time to develop that asynchronous online class. And then, you know, if it goes through the review process, there's a possibility that you might need to make some revisions to that class even after you've developed it. And then once you've done that, then there is another kind of phase where you have to consider your pedagogy and how you're going to manage it with the students who are face-to-face and the students who are live online. So some of that you can do just in the lead up time to prepping your class for the semester, which is typically what I do. And then most of my time in a course while I'm teaching it is actually spent really thinking about the best ways to continue to communicate with the asynchronous students, because I am making sure in a variety of ways that I am having the right conversations, providing the right information, providing updates and the various things that you would in a regular face-to-face class with your on-campus and live streaming students. But I want to make sure all of that information is also transmitted to those asynchronous students. And so I spend a considerable amount of time on feedback and announcements that go out to everyone as here's a reiteration of this information. And also for the fully asynchronous students, here are some key pieces of information that you need each week. So when I'm teaching a fully asynchronous online class, I do a lot of that anyway. But you have to be really cognizant of things that you may have said in class live that a certain number of students have gotten that you need to make sure you're also conveying to those asynchronous students. So to me, I don't even think that the development of the course is the more time-consuming thing. I think it's the amount of time I spend thinking about those asynchronous students during the semester.
Fascinating. You know, I know all campuses are different, but I really encourage faculty to take advantage of a support team before they start doing it. And that can really reduce the faculty development time and make things so much easier for them. Because if they reach out to the services first, we can hook them up with a librarian to explore an OER and reduce the development of content. Then we can hook them up with the online instructional designer and use the best practice templates. And then also we can hook them up with a mentor. And this is a person you can talk to about assessment and stuff like that. So there's so much that can be done now because it's more of a team effort. And if faculty tapped into that team in the beginning, it really can reduce the amount of development time later on.
Which is a great segue, Molly, into our next question. So thank you for that. I feel like you're looking at our Google Doc. So how do you train and prepare faculty for the delivery, the design and delivery of HyFlex on your campus? What is training required and what supports are you providing to your faculty?
Craig, Ryan?
Yeah, so I think my answer would be depends with a capital D. And it sort of ties back a little bit into what Michelle was saying. Whenever a faculty member expresses interest in moving to HyFlex, a conversation immediately starts on where their starting point is. Mm-hmm. And just to give you a recent example, in the last 2 weeks, we've had a couple faculty members come to us saying that they want to move into HyFlex. One individual has a course that she's been teaching online for several years. So her starting point is going to be very different than the other faculty member who wants to bring a course into HyFlex, who's not only has a course never been offered online before, it's never been offered as hybrid or blended or anything else. It's only been a very static in the classroom type of a course. So we start very individualized conversations with the faculty based on where their starting point is. The other piece too is the technology in the room can open up the timeline a little bit. We have some faculty that teach in a room that has a projector and a computer, and that's about it. And now they're transitioning into a room that has a camera mounted in the front and the rear, a document camera, you know, a lot of equipment that they've just never really practiced on. So in some cases, we tend to sort of slow play someone's move into HyFlex, and maybe we do like a baby steps approach. So maybe one term we just build a course in a development space and spend a lot of time with that faculty member working with our instructional designer and an instructional technologist. In other cases, we'll get the faculty member maybe more set up as like an online synchronous instructor. And so the course is available to students wherever they are, but it's a day and time. They're teaching out of a room so they can get comfortable with the equipment. If it would help, I'll post in the chat a link. We do have a HyFlex course development guide, and it talks about all the different development pieces that have to play out. And the timeline is going to be sped up or pulled back depending on where the faculty member is coming in. So I'll throw that up there for anyone who wants to check it out. It's a really good 45-page read if anyone's bored. So check it out.
Anyone else want to speak to faculty supports or training for faculty who are interested in HyFlux?
I think it's important to really listen to what the faculty needs are. Often we assume what they are. So checking in with the faculty, even the ones that are seasoned like Michelle, and saying, you know, are we providing what you're looking for? Are there any missing pieces? To constantly check in and listen to what they're experiencing is very important.
Yeah, I would echo that too. We really apply a continuous approach model to our HyFlex courses. So once they launch in their first semester, a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion, many meetings are taking place through that term, after that term, into the following term. Faculty are finding those little areas that need refinement. They, you know, they're touching base with the classroom technologist or the instructional technologist to say, this didn't go so well this term, I got to fix it for next term. When can we regroup? So there's, you know, once it's off the ground, nobody's work is done. Yeah. And that should be sort of in the background of everybody's thinking with this.
Great. So we're winding down. Those are the last of our formal questions. And I know that there were a few questions we missed in the chat. I'm going to get started with one, but if you feel like one was missed kind of further up, please feel free to repost here in the chat. We have one question from Melissa's iPad, so your iPad must be gifted. It's if your live class has discussions or breakout rooms, are the asynchronous students doing some alternate discussion activity, and only the asynchronous students doing that? And if so, how do you make sure that those students are doing that work, given any student could be asynchronous at any time?
Great question. So one of the things that, and this is going to seem like a long lead up to the answer to this question, but one of the things that I had done in the past before I was teaching HyFlex was some sort of graded, and in some cases, assessment of learning associated with discussion, which now that I'm teaching HyFlex, no discussion, whether it's an asynchronous or a face-to-face, is graded for assessment of learning content, right? So the student would get a participation credit or grade. And so that's one of the ways that I have made sure that I am not trying to assess student learning in a way that is not going to work well, and that every student has essentially an equal opportunity to participate in a discussion, whatever the discussion happens to be. So if I am doing a live breakout, typically the breakouts aren't something that I do so much unless I have a special thing that I have announced to the students in advance. But doing live presentations, on the other hand, I think I gave an example of that earlier, where the students would work asynchronously in groups. And so you can do that whether or not you're a student that comes face to face or on the live stream, or you never ever attend asynchronous session ever, but you can be put into a group with students who choose a different modality, and then you would present, and then you can, in most cases, the students who are grouped with other students who are asynchronous with some who are synchronous will choose to do an asynchronous recording of their presentation. If the student who is synchronous or asynchronous would not be available during class time. However, as I mentioned before, you have to be flexible. And in certain cases, the asynchronous student is certainly able to show up occasionally or to give a presentation, but if not, then be flexible and give them an opportunity to do the recording in a group or individually, as long as they're meeting the learning outcome there, which is not necessarily to work effectively in a group, but to do that presentation. I don't know if that really answered the question. Do you think that that was an answer to that question, Jamie?
I feel like you were describing how you were trying to be flexible in whatever type of assessment you were kind of utilizing or using for that particular course. Whatever you felt was the best way to assess their learning, you were trying to adapt it based on the modality of choice of that student. And so I think that applies the same to the discussion. It's going to depend on your course. It's going to depend on what you're assessing, et cetera. So I think you did a perfect job there, Michelle.
Yes, and I think the bottom line there is that the students aren't typically assessed for grading purposes and for learning outcome purposes on things that are either live or would require live participation, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. All right, so I see one other question that we haven't answered in the chat yet, so please feel free to post more. We have just a couple minutes left, and this question is from Lisa. So if I'm hearing this correctly, as we're about to launch the HyFlex instructional model, I should require a developed online course that meets quality and compliance standards. And once that is in place, they would be allowed to request to move to a HyFlex course model. Does that seem to jive with your experience, Molly, Craig, or
Yeah,
Ryan?
and just, really encourage when you have that intervention point with the faculty member that wants to go to HyFlex, hook them up right away with your support team, whatever that may be, your instructional designer, your librarians. Do everything you can to get them set up for success.
Great. Anyone else have any closing comments or thoughts about HyFlex? And but before we do that, I just want to say that I'm going to post in the chat here a link to the series of workshops that we ran this past fall. We did 5 different panels. We did one with on HyFlex, the first with the keynote speaker, Brian Beatty, where he talked about in great detail HyFlex, kind of from a broad perspective. And then we broke it down into a panel on SUNY administrators, then another on like learning environment specialists and IT directors, a faculty panel, and then a faculty supports panel as well. So we cover in these recordings a lot of these questions in much more depth with more faculty, with instructional designers, and with IT personnel. So we might be able to you might get some answers on the more technical questions about what equipment is best, what didn't work so well, et cetera. Craig and Michelle both kind of hinted at some tech experiences that they learned some really important lessons about that. But if anybody else wants to close us out with, or close themselves out with a statement, please feel free.
Be flexible.
Start early.
Yes.
Start early and be flexible.
I just wanted to say that Kristen Muller is in the room, and she did a presentation just before this one on definitions. And so if anyone in the room is interested in understanding the differences between the modalities and how they are coded, that they look at the recording from the past session or reach out to Kristen for some clarification.
All right, well, if we don't have any further questions from the peanut gallery, then I'm going to say thank you for attending today. And thank you to Ryan and Michelle, Craig, and Molly for your time and your expertise and your great explanations about the trends and experiences that your campus has endured over the pivot, and then prior to the pivot, et cetera. We know that your initial launch into HyFlex has been complicated, as everything else has been, by the pandemic. So we appreciate your perspectives here today. And I appreciate all of the great questions that we've gotten in the chat. And thanks, Alex, for giving us the platform this week. It's been a great conference, and we're happy to have been a part of it.
Thank you all. Really great information. Love hearing the different experiences from the various campuses, and love hearing Michelle, the faculty perspective on this is awesome. It was a great panel. Thank you so much. We have one more session today at 3 o'clock that I just want to plug. If folks are interested in hanging out, or taking a break and then coming back, Mike Daly and Chris Price are going to be hosting a Lumen Circles conversation around OER and Lumen Circles. So I hope that you will come back. I hope you have a great afternoon, and hope to see you tomorrow for the closing day of the summit. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.